June 12, 1971, 2:30 p.m. Sarah Mitchell stood in the small bridal room of St. Paul's Methodist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, adjusting her wedding dress one final time. The dress was vintage, purchased 6 months earlier from a consignment shop on Beale Street for just $45. Sarah had fallen in love with it immediately. The delicate hand stitching, the careful attention to detail, the way it fit perfectly despite being made decades earlier. What Sarah didn't know was that the dress had been made by Gladys Presley in 1957, one of the last dresses Gladys had sewn before her death in August 1958. Gladys had been a talented seamstress who took in sewing work to support her family before Elvis became famous. This dress had been commissioned by a wealthy Memphis woman who'd never picked it up, eventually making its way to that consignment shop. And what Sarah definitely didn't know was that Elvis Presley was driving past St. Paul's Methodist Church at that exact moment, heading home to Graceland after an appointment in downtown Memphis. Elvis was stopped at a red light across from the church when something caught his eye. Through one of the church's tall windows, he could see a woman in a white dress, and something about it made him look twice. The way the lace was arranged, the specific pattern of the hand stitching on the bodice, the small decorative flowers sewn into the waistline. Elvis's heart started pounding. He knew that stitching pattern. He'd watched his mother create it hundreds of times sitting at her sewing machine in their small house. That specific pattern, small loops with tiny flowers, was Gladys's signature. She'd done it on every dress she made. The light turned green. Cars behind Elvis began honking. But Elvis didn't move. He was staring at that dress through the church window, certain he was seeing his mother's work, but not understanding how that was possible. Gladys had been dead for 13 years. Elvis pulled his car into the church parking lot, not entirely sure what he was doing. He just knew he had to see that dress up close. Inside the church, the wedding was about to begin. Sarah's father waited to walk her down the aisle. The groom, Michael Mitchell, stood nervously at the altar. 75 guests sat in the pews. The organist began playing the processional music. That's when the church's main doors opened and Elvis Presley walked in. At first, no one quite believed what they were seeing. Elvis Presley walking into their small neighborhood church wedding. People began whispering, then pointing, then standing up. Elvis walked straight down the center aisle, ignoring the shocked stares, his eyes fixed on Sarah, who had just emerged from the bridal room. When Elvis reached them, he looked at the dress with intensity. "Excuse me," Elvis said, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry to interrupt your wedding, but I need to ask you something about that dress. Where did you get it?" Sarah's father, stunned, into silence, just stared at Elvis. Sarah, equally shocked but somehow finding her voice, answered, "I bought it at a consignment shop on Beale Street, the vintage rose, about 6 months ago." Elvis stepped closer, studying the dress. His hands were trembling. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the stitching on the bodice. Sarah nodded, too surprised to do anything else. Elvis gently touched the hand-stitched pattern, tracing the small loops and flowers with his finger. His eyes filled with tears. "This is my mother's work. I'd know this stitching anywhere. She made this dress." The church had gone completely silent. Even the organist had stopped playing. Everyone was watching this surreal scene unfold. Elvis Presley, one of the most famous men in the world, standing in their small church, crying over a bride's vintage dress. "Your mother made this?" Sarah asked softly. "Yes," Elvis said, wiping his eyes. "My mother was a seamstress. Before I became successful, she took in sewing work to help support our family. This pattern, these little loops with the flowers, this was her signature. She did it on every dress she made. I used to watch her work late at night, doing these stitches by hand because she said machine stitching wasn't personal enough." Elvis looked at Sarah with an expression of wonder and pain mixed together. "My mother died in 1958. I thought all her work was gone. I didn't know any of her dresses still existed. And now, here's one, being worn at a wedding, and I just happened to drive past at exactly the right moment to see it through the window." Sarah felt tears in her own eyes now. "Mr. Presley, I had no idea. The shop owner didn't know who made it. She just said it was vintage, probably from the 1950s. Elvis nodded. 1957, probably. That's when Mama was doing her last commission work. She died in August 1958. This dress is one of the last things she ever made." The groom, Michael, had walked down from the altar to join this unexpected conversation. Mr. Presley, we're honored that you're here, but we're a little confused about what happens now. Should we postpone the wedding?" Elvis looked at Michael, then at Sarah, then back at the dress. No, you shouldn't postpone. My mother made this dress for a wedding. That's what she intended. She'd want to see it worn at a wedding, not locked away somewhere. He paused, overcome with emotion. I just needed to see it, to touch something she made with her own hands. I don't have many things like that left. Elvis wiped his eyes again and composed himself. I'm sorry for interrupting your ceremony. Please continue. I'll leave. Wait, Sarah said. You came all this way. You should stay. You should see your mother's dress be part of a wedding. I think she'd want that. Elvis looked surprised. You want me to stay? For your wedding? Yes, Sarah said firmly. This dress brought you here for a reason. Please stay. Elvis looked around the small church, at the shocked faces of the guests, at the simple decorations, at the genuine warmth in Sarah's eyes. All right, he said. I'll stay, if you're sure. We're sure, Michael said, extending his hand to Elvis. Welcome to our wedding, Mr. Presley. Elvis shook his hand, then did something that surprised everyone. He turned to the gathered guests and said, Folks, I apologize for the interruption, but I just found out something miraculous. The bride is wearing a dress my mother made 13 years ago. My mother loved weddings. She always said they were the happiest occasions, so if it's all right with Sarah and Michael, I'd like to honor my mother's memory by making sure this wedding is as special as possible. Before anyone could respond, Elvis pulled out his wallet and found a business card. He wrote something on the back and handed it to Michael. That's my accountant's number. Call him tomorrow. Tell him I said to cover all the costs of this wedding and your honeymoon. Wherever you want to go, whatever you want to do, it's on me, Sarah gasped. Mr. Presley, we can't accept that. It's too much. You're wearing my mother's dress, Elvis said simply. You're letting me be part of this moment. It's not too much. It's exactly right. Mama would want this. She'd want her work to be part of something beautiful and happy. Please, let me do this. Michael looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at her father. Her father, finding his voice for the first time since Elvis appeared, said, Son, if Elvis Presley wants to pay for your wedding, you say thank you. Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. Elvis laughed too, and suddenly, this bizarre situation felt almost normal. Elvis sat in the back pew of the church while Sarah and Michael got married. He watched Sarah walk down the aisle in his mother's dress, watched her exchange vows with Michael, watched them kiss as the husband and wife. And through it all, Elvis kept his eyes on that dress, on the stitching his mother had done so carefully, imagining Gladys sitting at her sewing machine, creating something beautiful that would still matter 13 years after her death. When the ceremony ended and the guests moved to the church's fellowship hall for the reception, Elvis stayed. He hadn't planned to, but something about this moment felt important, felt like closure he hadn't known he needed. At the reception, Elvis posed for photos with the bride and groom. He signed autographs for guests. He told stories about his mother's sewing work, about watching her create dresses late at night, about how proud she'd been of her craftsmanship. She used to say that every dress she made had a piece of her heart in it, Elvis told the gathered crowd. She said when a woman wore one of her dresses, she was carrying Gladys Presley's love with her. I always thought that was just a nice thing to say. But now, seeing Sarah wear this dress, seeing how beautiful it looks, seeing how it brought me here today, I realize Mama was right. Her heart is still in this dress, and it led me here to see it one more time. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Before Elvis left, he asked Sarah one more question. What are you going to do with the dress after today? Keep it forever, Sarah said immediately. I was going to keep it anyway because I loved it. But now that I know who made it, now that I know what it means to you, I'll treasure it. I promise to take care of it. Thank you, Elvis said. That means everything to me. Elvis kept his promise. His accountant called Michael the next day, and Elvis paid for everything. The wedding venue, the reception, the flowers, the photographer, and a 2-week honeymoon to Hawaii that Sarah and Michael could never have afforded on their own. But more than the money, Elvis had given them a story they'd tell for the rest of their lives. The day Elvis Presley crashed their wedding because the bride was wearing his mother's dress. Sarah kept the dress in a special preservation box in her closet. She took it out once a year on her anniversary, showing it to her children when they were born, telling them the story of Elvis and Gladys and the miraculous day a stranger recognized his mother's handiwork. Elvis died 6 years later, in August 1977. When Sarah heard the news, she got out the dress and cried, thinking about that afternoon in the church when Elvis had touched his mother's stitching and wept. Sarah Mitchell lived until 2019, passing away at age 71. In her will, she left specific instructions about Gladys Presley's dress. It was to be donated to Graceland, to be part of the Elvis Presley Museum, so that others could see Gladys's work and understand the story of the day Elvis found his mother's creation being worn by a stranger. When museum curators at Graceland received the dress, they were stunned. They'd had no idea this dress existed. They knew Gladys had been a seamstress, but they'd never seen any of her actual work. The dress went through careful preservation and authentication, with textile experts confirming that the stitching pattern matched descriptions of Gladys Presley's technique. Today, the dress is displayed at Graceland with a placard that tells the story. Wedding dress made by Gladys Presley, circa 1957, worn by Sarah Mitchell at her wedding on June 12, 1971. Elvis Presley, driving past the church, recognized his mother's distinctive hand-stitching through a window and stopped to investigate. He stayed for the wedding and paid for the couple's entire reception and honeymoon. The dress was donated to Graceland by Sarah Mitchell's family in 2019, bringing it home 52 years after it was made. Visitors to Graceland often spend long moments looking at the dress, reading the story, marveling at the intricate hand-stitching that caught Elvis's eye from across a street. The dress represents something profound about Elvis's relationship with his mother, that 13 years after her death, he could still recognize her work. Instantly, that seeing it moved him to tears, that he honored her memory by helping strangers celebrate their love. The story of the wedding. Elvis crashed because the bride was wearing his mother's dress is about many things: the enduring nature of a mother's love, the unexpected ways the past reaches into the present, and the importance of paying attention to small details that might lead to miraculous moments. Elvis could have driven past that church without looking. He could have ignored the dress he glimpsed through the window. He could have convinced himself he was seeing things, that his grief was playing tricks on him. But he stopped. He investigated. And in doing so, he found a connection to his mother. He thought he'd lost forever. For Sarah and Michael Mitchell, what should have been a small, modest wedding became the most memorable day of their lives, not because of Elvis's fame or his money, but because their ceremony became the setting for a son's reunion with his mother's memory. The dress itself became a symbol of how objects carry stories, how craftsmanship transcends time, how something made with love in 1957 could still matter in 1971, and could still teach lessons about love and loss in 2019 when it finally came home to Graceland. Gladys Presley died without knowing her son would become one of the most famous people in the world. She died believing she was just a seamstress who made dresses for local women, doing her best to support her family. But her work outlived her by more than 60 years. Her distinctive stitching pattern became a signature that her son could recognize instantly. And her final dresses became treasures that carried her love forward through decades. The wedding dress at Graceland, with its delicate hand-stitching and small decorative flowers, stands as a testament to Gladys Presley's skill and her influence on her son. Elvis never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the nights his mother worked late to support their family. And when he saw her work being worn by a stranger, he recognized it immediately and honored it in the most generous way he knew how. The bride who unknowingly wore Gladys Presley's dress got more than a vintage gown from a consignment shop. She got a piece of history, a connection to one of music's greatest legends, and a story that would be told and retold for generations. And Elvis got something even more precious, a few hours of connection with his mother's memory, a chance to see her work appreciated and loved, and an opportunity to honor her legacy in a way that would have made Gladys proud. The wedding Elvis crashed wasn't just about a dress. It was about how love transcends death, how mothers influence their children long after they're gone, and how sometimes, if we're paying attention, the universe gives us exactly the moments we need, even if we didn't know we needed them.